Welcome everybody to Ein Sof Learning. We're going to continue in our series on Talmud Eser Sefirot, the study of the 10 dimensions by Rav Yehuda Leib Ashlag, which is the commentator on the Eitz Chaim, which is the Tree of Life, written by the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, in the 16th century. This work is the entrance to the Tree of Life, because if you do not know the commentary, which is the inner light of the words of the Ari, then you cannot really understand or know the intentions of the Arizal in his writing. For example, he says in the first sentence that you should know that before the creation was created, there was an upper light that filled all of reality. What type of light? Physical? Emotional? What's light exactly? I'm a physical creature, aren't I? And the answer is no. You're a spiritual creature, and you've been placed into the clothing of a body, and you believe you're a physical creature, but really you're a soul on a physical journey. Not a body on a spiritual journey, but a spiritual being on a physical journey. It's very different. The person is the soul, is not the body. The body is just a vessel that allows the soul to influence the physical world. Without the clothing of the body, the soul cannot really inhabit or penetrate into this realm of consciousness. In any case, we're going to now go to a random page, just because I find that to be pretty interesting to see where we land. Al hata'a lechashuv. You should not make the mistake to think שמפאת צמצום האור מהנקודה האמצעית היה איזה שינוי באין סוף, חס ושלום. You should not think, even for a second, that because of the tzimtzum, because of the contraction of God's light from nekuda emsayit, from the central point of the Ein Sof, that denotes any type of change or difference within the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof is perfect, is unchanging. There is nothing that really ever happens, so to speak, in the Ein Sof. The only thing that exists in the Ein Sof is the equality of the endless light. That's it. It's just one thing that existed, and that's everything. But in its primordial state, before it was brought into a format wherein which created beings could experience that light. This is before not just the creation, but before the emanation of even those spiritual worlds that transcend what we call heaven. It's even above the highest worlds. This is the reality that we call Ein Sof, the endless one. There's no lack, no boundaries, no limits, no worlds, no creatures, no differences, no definitions, no categories. There is nothing that really exists there besides the endless light of God in its complete and utterly glorified perfection, what we call or Ein Sof. Everything's even, everything's equal. That's the Ein Sof. Nothing ever changes, nothing ever happens. It's just oneness. But then, in order to create the world, he needed to conceal his light because he had completely filled all of reality. So if God fills all of reality, there's no space, so to speak. Again, this is a metaphor. There is no space for the creation, which would denote a lack. Meaning, the creation itself is a concealment of the endless light. So there was no space for concealment. That's what it really means. There was no space for concealment because the light filled everything. There was no space for lack. There was a space, but it wasn't empty. Don't get me wrong. Don't get the Ari wrong. The Ari is telling us that there was no makom panui. There was no empty space. Implying what? What does it imply? That there is a makom, there is a place, there is a space. However, it is not panui. It's not empty. So what is it? It's occupied. Occupied by what? This endless light. That's the state of the Ein Sof, which is before the contraction, before the initial point wherein which God decided to create a seemingly separate reality wherein which the worlds and the creatures could exist. We live in a post-contraction world, post-Tzimtzum. The goal is not to reverse the Tzimtzum, but to continue the plan of creation, which the Tzimtzum was necessary for that. Through the Tzimtzum, we are now challenged. We are now placed in a scenario where we cannot fully recognize the presence of God, yet the path of Torah still applies. Serving God still applies, but we cannot perceive the truth of God. That's the war. Because the evil inclination comes to trick you into believing the darkness, into believing what you see and what you feel. And that's why the Torah says, do not trust your eyes and do not follow your heart. Instead, the only thing you can trust and rely on is Hashem and His wisdom, because the chokhmah of the Torah binds you to Him, brings you closer, because it makes you more similar to Him. What does it mean, closer? How do I become closer to God? Is it even possible to become closer to God? And the answer is yes, through becoming more similar to Him, by emulating His attributes of mercy, of love, of chesed, of really keeping His promise to the children of Abraham, that He will not neglect them, He will not abandon them. How many promises have you made that you have neglected, that you have failed to fulfill? How often do we say something and we don't actually do what we say? It makes us not trustworthy. That's called being different from Hashem and being far from Hashem. When your attributes are not aligned, they do not emulate, they do not agree with the attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. 13 attributes of mercy, to be exact. Go and research the 13 attributes of mercy if you want to know more details. So you shouldn't think that because the contraction took place, that in order to create the seemingly separate reality for the world and for the creatures to exist, that implies that Ein Sof changed. Ein Sof did not change. Ein Sof still exists in the same way He did always, because from His point of view, the Tzimtzum never happened. You got to understand, from the Ein Sof's point of view, there is no contraction. Because the moment the contraction took place, a new reality was created called Olam HaTzimtzum, the world of Tzimtzum, the world of contraction. So now we have two worlds. We've got Ein Sof, which is the Olam that precedes the Tzimtzum. And then there's Olam Tzimtzum, which is the result of the Tzimtzum, wherein which the light of Hashem, the endless light, departed from the central point, which is the place, which is the reality that we were talking about. We said that there was a place. Remember this? We said that there was a place in the Ein Sof, and this place was occupied with light. Everywhere it was completely filled with light. Now the Tzimtzum is when you remove all of the light from this space, from this place. It's a world of complete and utter absence of light. So first we've got Ein Sof. Then we've got, or let me be more clear. First we had the Malchut of Ein Sof. Malchut of Ein Sof is the place that was fulfilled by the endless light. And then we've got Malchut HaTzimtzum, or what we call Malchut HaMetzumtzemet, the contracted Malchut, which is the same Malchut that we had before, although it's now absent of light. So first the Malchut was filled with the light, and then it becomes absent of light. That's the contraction in as few words, as simple words as possible. The withdrawal, the removal of all of the Or Ein Sof from the Malchut of Ein Sof, from the place that was occupied before the contraction. However, the Malchut of Ein Sof still remains in her place, filled with endless light. Now there is an additional Malchut called Malchut HaMetzumtzemet that lacks the light. Now we have two Malchuts. The first Malchut still filled with light. Nothing ever changed. The second Malchut is now absent of light, is what we call Malchut HaMetzumtzemet. So don't think that just because the Tzimtzum occurred, that implies a change in the Ein Sof. And he continues, Ki ein ha'adar utmura beruchaniut. There is no such concept of absence or change in the spiritual wisdom of Kabbalah, which is spiritual reality. In Ruchaniut, there is no such concept of lack, of absence, of change. So it shouldn't even cross your mind. God forbid. Especially when we're talking about the Ein Sof. Ein Sof is God. You believe Ein Sof can change, can be a difference? God forbid. And he continues. Ve'ein tzarich lomar b'makom hagavoa hazeh. And it's not necessary for me to even tell you this. This is what Rav Ashlag is saying. It's not necessary for me to tell you in such a high place. You should already know this. And he continues. Ela inyan ha-tzimtzum ha'amur. Rather, the tzimtzum na'aseh lemahut chadasha. It became a new essence. The malchut, which was occupied by the light before the contraction, is one thing. And now there is a new malchut, a new essence, called malchut ha-metzumtzemet, v'nosefet, which is in addition to the first malchut, that was in the Ein Sof, be'ofen shaha Ein Sof Baruch Hu nisha'er bekol achduto, and therefore the Ein Sof remains in its full oneness, its full unity. Achduto apashuta. And this unity of the Ein Sof, as we've explained before, is a simple unity. It's achdut pashut, which means everything exists in its primordial state of oneness. Because before the Tzimtzum, all the worlds exist in their full measure and glory. That's the words of Talmud Eser Sefirot. Kemo shehaya miterem haTzimtzum, which is the case before the Tzimtzum. And after the Tzimtzum, that's when the olamot begin to emerge or concatenate, sequence, chain, one after the other. Adam, Kadmon, Atzilut, Bria, Yatzira, Asiya. That only becomes apparent after the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum, the olamot still existed. Of course they still existed. But in their primordial state, which is in their full measure and their full glory, in a state of achdut pashut. Simple oneness. You cannot discern differences. You cannot point to multiplicities. There is no 5 worlds before the Tzimtzum. There is only one reality, and that's the Ein Sof. It's not even called a world, as we've explained earlier. Olam means concealment. It's called Metziut. The Metziut of the Ein Sof, it's a makom that is completely filled with Or Ein Sof. That's the Malchut of the Ein Sof. It's a place. Spiritual, of course, is not a physical place. Don't ever take these words physically. Because even after the Tzimtzum, we're still not talking about something physical. It takes a lot of worlds and concatenation and sequencing and chains of dimensions before we reach this world, which is the only dimension where it's possible to serve God. But above this dimension, above the Malchut Shel Asiya, which is Malchut of Olam Hazeh, it's totally unthinkable to compare this Malchut to the Malchut that we're talking about, which is in the Ein Sof. 2 completely different Malchuyot. They're both Malchuts. In fact, this lowly Malchut is the Malchut that is destined to reach the peak of the chain of dimensions once Mashiach comes b'mhera b'yameinu. This Malchut, which is the lowest of them all, will shoot to the peak of all the Malchuyot. That's actually the secret of Sof Ma'aseh b'machshava techila. The end of Ma'aseh, which means the end of Asiya. What's the end of Asiya? That's the Malchut of Asiya. B'machshava techila was the first thing that God thought of. The first thing that God thought of is this world. But not in the way it is today. In the way that it is destined to be. When Shabbat comes. Because when Shabbat comes, that is the Olam Haba, that is Sof Ma'aseh. But it is really Machshava Techila. It is really there from the very beginning. That was the first thing he thought of. That's actually a tremendous musar for how to approach the goals you have in life. First, see the end goal. What's the result you're looking for? What is the ultimate goal? And then make your way back to determine how you're going to get there. That's what Hashem did. First, he thought what he wants. Because that's the Ratzon of Hashem. That's the Ratzon Pashut, which is explained in this Chokhmah. That's why it says, Hu Ushmo Echad. In the Ein Sof, him and his name, which means him and his Ratzon, were one. Are one. There is no were one. They are one. Because were implies past. And there is no time, as we've already explained. So, this is a consciousness. It doesn't come just through studying, no. It comes through training of shifting the way you think. Because the way we think, I'm not going to be politically correct here, is wrong. To put it bluntly. Certainly lacking. So, I give everybody a bracha that we continue in this limud, despite any confusions that there may be at the beginning. It might be very unclear in the beginning. For many it is. For me it is. But if you have the ratzon to keep going despite the setbacks, then you can be rest assured that you will eventually attain your chelek in the Torah. Specifically in this dimension of the Torah. How do you know you have the capacity? How do you know you actually have a chelek in this portion of the Torah? If you have the ratzon. If you lack the ratzon, either you don't know yourself, which is quite possible, because most people don't recognize what their true ratzon is until they're put into a position which brings it out. Or it could be that you don't actually have the chelek, which is okay. You have to serve Hashem from your own chelek, depending on whatever level it is. It's not a matter of superiority or of inferiority. It's a matter of your capacity. So, I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, as always, put them in the comment section. And like, comment, subscribe. And if it benefited you, and most likely it's going to benefit someone you know, so don't be afraid to share it with your loved ones. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey everybody, thanks for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't be afraid to share this video with your loved ones, as we know that we are trying to reach as many souls as we possibly can with the wisdom of the Torah, specifically its inner dimensions called Kabbalah, which is the mystical secrets that are contained within God's holy Torah. And I invite you to join me on this effort to spreading this wisdom to the four corners of the world so we can prepare for what we've all been waiting for, the final redemption, where Israel will be redeemed along with the righteous Gentiles.